Afternoon, friends. I trust that we are all okay this afternoon. We thank God once again for His grace and His mercy, and we thank Him for the gift of life. We are continuing with the story of Joseph. Today we are beginning Genesis chapter 42. We will do half of our chapter and then finish off hopefully next week. Verse 1 says, when Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt, he said to his sons, why are you standing around looking at one another? I've heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive, otherwise we will die. Verse 3, so Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. But Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother Benjamin go with them, for fear some harm might happen to him. Verse 5. So Jacob's sons arrived in Egypt along with others to buy food, for the famine was in Canaan as well. Verse 6, since Joseph was governor of all Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was him that his brothers came. It was to him that his brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where are you from? He demanded. From the land of Canaan, they replied. We have come to buy food. Verse 8, although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. Verse 9, and he remembered the dreams he had about them many years before. He said to them, you are spies. You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become. No, my lord, they exclaimed, your servants have simply come to buy food. We are all brothers, members of the same family. We are honest men, sir. We are not spies. Yes, you are, Joseph insisted. You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become. Sir, they said, there are actually 12 of us. We, your servants, are all brothers, sons of a man living in the land of Canaan. Our youngest brother is back there with our father right now. And one of our brothers is no longer with us. But Joseph insisted, as I said, you are spies. This is how I will test your story. I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you will never leave Egypt unless your youngest brother comes here. Verse 16. One of you must go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here in prison. Then we will find out whether or not your story is true. By the life of Pharaoh, if it turns out that you don't have a younger brother, then I'll know you are spies. So Joseph put them all in prison for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, I am a God-fearing man. If you do as I say, you will live. Verse 19, if you really are honest men, choose one of your brothers to remain in prison. The rest of you may go home with grain for your starving families. But you must bring your youngest brother back to me. This will prove that you are telling the truth and you will not die. To this they agreed. So this is chapter 42, the first 20 verses. Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt. And he tells his children, he says to them, why are you waiting? What are you waiting for? Go and buy grain, otherwise you will die of hunger. As we read in the previous chapter, that the land, the famine was so serious that it affected Egypt and all the countries that were around Egypt. So Canaan was also affected by this serious or severe famine. So Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, so he sent his children to go, or his sons to go and buy grain in Egypt. But he didn't send Benjamin, the youngest, because he was scared that something may happen. I guess he was still thinking about Joseph, who had vanished, and his other children, or Joseph's brothers, had not told him the truth about what they actually did to Joseph. They did not tell him that they had sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. So he was afraid that if Benjamin goes and he doesn't come back, it was gonna kill him. So he said, all of you can go, but Benjamin will remain. So they left for Egypt. And when they got to Egypt, because Joseph was the one who was in charge, they had to go to him and they bowed down to him. How interesting is this? When he told them so many years ago that you will bow to me, they said he was a dreamer, he was lying, and that was one of the reasons why they sold him, because they called him a dreamer. But now the dream that he had told them was getting fulfilled, but they didn't even realize because they did not recognize him, but he recognized them. And then he asked them where they were from. What is also interesting is that they couldn't even pick up his voice. I guess his voice probably had changed, so they could not tell that it was Joseph. And he says to them, you are spies. You are spies. And so you will have to, I'll have to put you in prison for 3 days. And after that, one of you will go home and bring your younger brother to me. If that doesn't happen, that means you are actually spies. So in a nutshell, this is the summary of these 20 verses. What we learn from this story are so many lessons. Egypt had grain, all the other countries had no grain. This was because of a man of God in Egypt, and this man of God was Joseph. The same Joseph that his brothers sold to the Ishmaelites is the one that was responsible for this grain that was in Egypt. Sometimes God will communicate to pagan kings, and he communicated to Pharaoh, who was a pagan king, and Pharaoh listened and did as he was instructed and chose a wise and intelligent man, who was Joseph, to store grain, because he believed that there was a famine that was coming, because Joseph had told him or had interpreted the dreams. So a man of God who is among us, the pagans, will stand for God. If they are faithful, God will communicate to him, and instead he will communicate to those that are around him. In this case, Joseph, although he was a slave, God still used him in Egypt. And Egypt was saved from this severe famine that affected the whole region. And even the same brothers that had sold him came to buy the grain from him. He actually saved their lives. And Joseph himself, he was really a man that forgives. Imagine if it was you or it was me. Were you gonna just forgive your brothers like that for what they did to you? But Joseph did those things that he did, but he wasn't actually fixing them. I would say that he was just playing around with them. And he didn't really mean what he was doing. He was a God-fearing man who forgave his brother.